Waterfall, the CCW podcast.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Waterfall, brought to you by CCW, the Consumer Council for Water. As I'm sure you know by now, we are here to talk all about water saving advice, helping you save water, which is good for the environment, good for your pocket, good for everybody. I'm here today with the water guru, Karen.
Hello, Cath.
And with everybody's favourite producer, Tom.
Hi Karen, hi Cath, hi everyone listening out there in Waterfall land.
We're going to, for once, be brief today because we've got a genuinely really interesting episode with so many facts and details in it that we want to cut to it and not have us waffling at you. So we're going to speak in a moment to Gareth at Affinity Water and Jane from Weir The Agency, who are going to tell us all about Bidwell Water Savers, which is an entire housing estate that they've managed to encourage to save water, which is really quite something, very on brand for Waterfall.
And great to see something done at that community level.
Absolutely. I think it shows, doesn't it, that you can bring everybody together and, you know, small changes add up to big action, actually. But before we do that, we must tell you, if you would like to get in touch with us, please do. You can email us at podcast@ccwater.org.uk and you can find us on all of your social media channels. Just search for @CCW Voice. Right, with no further ado though, it's time to bring on the guests.
Be sure to head back through the archives and check out all the past episodes of Waterfall.
So we are joined today by Gareth Barker, who is Affinity Water's Head of Wholesale and Development Experience, and by Jane Bellard, who is from Weir The Agency, who is the Water Savings Behaviour Change Specialist. And we're going to talk today about a really exciting and hugely successful project that you've been running, looking at Bidwell Water Savers. So I think the first big question is, what is that? And what's it trying to fix?
I'll take that question. So what is it for us? It's trying to resolve an issue that we know we're going to have, which is very much we've got a lot of growth in our area, as of a lot of the UK. And we know that, water is going to be harder to extract. We're going to have to look at longer term, very expensive solutions. And we needed to look at what a solution could be today. So we submitted a bid into the Ofwat Breakthrough Challenge and we were successful. And that was a project that was the water neutrality project. And that very much was to look at 3 housing development sites, one of which was to look at technology. How do you reduce water consumption from technology? Second site was how do you look at behavioural change on a new housing estate? And then the third one was to be all of the best practices from site 1 and 2 into a final hurrah development site of absolutely everything. So that's how we got started. Hit a brick quite quickly, which was very much the technology side. So we worked with some great partners, Albion Water and Independent Water Networks. And when we got to the technology side, we hit the brick of wholesome water. So as a water company, we have to provide a wholesome water. So when we were looking at, well, how do you use technology to reduce drinking water consumption? Obviously, toilets and gardens is the first area you would hit. So great plan. Take rainwater, use on-site suds and attenuation as all equivalent of a local reservoir, put it back into people's houses. And we thought, great, let's get on with that. And then straight into legislation. Well, it's not wholesome water. You won't be able to do it. So we ended up, and it was part of it was whilst it was a problem, it was also a success. So it meant we couldn't do the site 1, which is what we really wanted to do from a technology viewpoint. But it also meant we had to look differently to site 2 because we still had the money. We still had plans very much of how can you enable water neutral housing development. And in this case, how do you do it without actually technology involved? There must be a way of being able to really achieve this. So it meant we ended up looking at a housing site in Houghton Regis called Bidwell's development site. And we very much looked at, right, let's look at the residents and let's look at everything else around it. And let's come up with the concept of what water neutrality could mean for a new housing site. You simply couldn't just build houses and not put any water in. So that idea of a brand new house where your washing machine uses sand and things like that simply doesn't exist. So you need to start looking at, right, so let's look at where we extract the water from, and where we treat it and we put it into supply. So at that level, who are the big users and who are not the big users, and who can we support? And that very much got us into the idea of water neutrality. For us was the thought that you could build a house and not increase abstraction in that area by working with others and working with the local residents. And then we started first part, let's look at the residents on the site, just under 1,000 houses. How do we engage? How do we move away from your traditional areas of just doing behavioural change? How do you actually do a localised hyper engagement direct to an individual living in a new house itself? And we knew from the very beginning that the best time to ever really engage with a resident is when they've just bought their house and they're really keen on their new house. They want to look at changes. If they've got a house that can use it for water efficiency or energy efficiency, they're likely to be really interested in it. So we felt there's something we could do there, and then we felt there's probably something at the local community level we could do as well, which is where Jin then comes in with the background of behavioural change specifically within.
I mean, picking up the point there that you were describing the pressures on water resources. You know, this is obvious. You know, we at Waterfall we try to explain to people that there is only so much water companies can do to keep taking more water out of our rivers and streams. There are these wider environmental pressures that you're also having to take into account.
Yeah, and we know, you know, the Environment Agency did a really interesting talk a couple of years ago where they talked about the imminent threat of water. We know the ability to abstract will reduce. We've got a lot of chalk streams in the Affinity region, which we're really proud of and we want to protect. So how do you actually do something different? We've got a lot of houses in our area. We know between now and 20 years' time, for instance, we're looking at a shortfall of around 400 million litres per day if we just carry on in the way we're going. And yes, we've got great ideas. We've got the Grand Union Canal, which has been in the news this week. Some really interesting ideas of how do you work with other water companies and actually transport water from one region to another region. But we also know we need to deliver that, and we need time for that to be delivered to be a success. So we very much looked at it's a problem today. So, you know, we're humans. We love the idea of hindsight, and we love the idea of being able to point out and say, well, this is what you should have done. You know, but when it comes to foresight, we know we've got climate change. We know we've got less water. We know we've got great demand on water. We know 2022 was a beautiful summer, unless you're in the water industry, in which case most of them were in crisis mode. We know that is our future. That's going to be our routine future. So we knew, you know, doing nothing wasn't an option. And with foresight, it's very much so what are you doing about it? So we felt we couldn't just do that. We needed to engage with absolutely everyone in that principle. So it's not just us, it's planning authorities, it's the local residents, it's existing residents, it's our non-household customers, and it's us as water companies as well. Each of us have the opportunity to use the knowledge of what's coming to try and resolve some of the issues today.
For me, Gareth, we know that the water industry is full of lots of acronyms and terms that we all go, oh yeah, we're fine with that. Everybody understands what we mean when we use codes. But water neutrality itself, I imagine, is quite a difficult concept to get across to people. So how did you go about explaining that? I mean, I suppose right back to the original bid as well as to the residents that you were trying to work with?
I think it's, even at water company level, you could probably have 10 engineers in a room talking about it with 20 different answers.
Yeah.
And I think for us, we just distilled it down to abstraction. That's the real aim. We don't want to take more water out of the environment. And the reality is we'd like to leave more water in the environment, but still cater for all of the new houses. So water neutrality was right. Let's look at the abstraction. Where does the water from abstraction go? Who takes the water? Who's wasting the water? Who's not using it efficiently? And try and target those areas. And if we can reduce that, and we can get people to use water wisely without preaching, then the overall idea is that would be water neutrality. If the amount of water on the site, which was 262,000 litres a day, if we could find the equivalent elsewhere and save it and get residents on the site to use less water, if we could get them saving of 262,000 litres a day, we would say that that development site was water neutral when it came to the abstraction.
I think that's really insightful, because I think sometimes if you hear water neutral, you kind of think, does that mean I can use zero, or I have to reuse every drop of water that I get rid of? And then the mind boggles, doesn't it? It sounds
doesn't mean have to keep
insurmountable.
toilets. No.
The campaign itself, it focused really heavily, as you've said, Gareth, because that technology just isn't there. It made you look differently and focus really heavily on the behaviour change. So Jane, I think that's where you come in, isn't it? That's where your expertise lies. So what kind of things did you do with the residents to help them make all these savings?
We went through a long journey to work out exactly what the right thing to do was here, because actually this is not just about actually making Bidwell West that development water neutral. This is about creating a blueprint that would work in any future new housing development of any size, any geography, in a rainy, wet area, in a really dry, southeastern area. And so actually we had a pressure to make sure we had got something that was like industry-wide, usable, templatable, but also, like, we know from behavioural change, and we know from previous campaigns and work we've done over the last few years, that local is really important and really relevant. And so sort of like, how do you get that really relevant, really local to this community and templatable and usable for everybody? And we did a lot of research. We did research into what are the most prevalent behaviours, how much water would people save, how many people do each of those. And the reality is, everybody who works in water efficiency will know there's no one thing everybody does, there's one thing nobody does. So you kind of got to tackle everything, but if you do that, it's too confusing for people. So what we did was distilled it down with customers and with researchers and said, right, let's pick 6 of the most common, highest saving behaviours that we can find, and ask people to just choose one. And they decide which one they choose, and they make the choice to stick to it. And so what we sort of made then was this pledge system. So we created 6 pledges. You choose one, you stick to it until it's a habit. Some people wanted to choose many, and that was interesting. And when we did the door knocking activity, a lot of people sort of said, well, I want to do them all. And actually, as a behavioural scientist, I was like, it's great that you want to do them all, but actually what we've decided, and something that we're working on at the moment with Cambridge Water following that, is let's do still pick one. Make sure that you really nail that one, because behaviour change is much harder than people think, and it can feel like, okay, it's one thing, I can do that, but actually, like, as your motivation wanes, as the original conversation that you had feels further behind you, actually you need habit to kick in. So you've got to just keep repeating that action. So that's something that we talked a lot to residents about. But yeah, that was how we got there, this sort of pledge system.
And out of interest, what were the 6 activities?
So we asked 6 originally, and we actually added 2 when it became the summer months, so that they were 2 that were relevant to gardening and washing your car. So those 2, using a watering can instead of a hose and a bucket instead of a hose for washing your car, were the 2 that we added. But the original 6 were washing up in a bowl instead of under a running tap. And we also talked to customers a lot and used other messages to talk about, actually a dishwasher is more efficient usually anyway, but a lot of residents didn't have dishwashers. We asked them to use the washing machine full and on eco mode, fill the bath 1 inch less. Interestingly, that was the least taken up. That only 10% of people took that one up. Shower for 2 minutes less than usual. Use the small button on the dual flush button, and turn off the tap when you brush your teeth.
All of those, I see why you had residents going, do you know what, I'm going to pick loads, because they sound really achievable, don't they? But you're right, in building habits. I know when I changed my washing machine a few years back, I like to keep my appliances for about 3 decades before I do that. So my old one didn't have an eco button, but this one does. And I am fastidious about pressing it. But at first it was a habit that needed to be built. Now I do it all the time, and it's really simple. It has, no impact on my life whatsoever in terms of convenience. And yet it saves quite a surprising amount. I think it's
about 1 bathtub full every load. And when we talk to customers and give them that extra bit of insight, and also that sort of like, there will be some things that are difficult. We send nudge emails afterwards, a chain of triggered emails once they've picked their pledge that go a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks after they've picked, and they tell them what will be difficult and how to overcome it. Because that's the thing, is like, there's no point painting a really super rosy picture of how great your life's going to be when you've made this change. It's like, actually, don't worry if you're finding this a bit difficult. Everybody does, and this is why, and this is what you can do to overcome it. So the eco mode, most people find that it's the fact that it's long, it confuses them. They think the short mode is the eco one, and it's like, no, that's much more power hungry. So it's just trying to explain it to people. And then they're like, oh, okay, yeah, fine. I'll just stick it on earlier in the day or whatever. You know, it's not difficult, but you kind of have to turn the cogs for people sometimes.
I mean, what were the kind of oddities that came up in that? I do think it's quite fun that people wanted to do everything all at once. But what other bits came up?
Yeah, do you know what? The most interesting thing was when we did events, and you can actually talk face to face with people. So right at the beginning, the first piece of comms anybody received was a letter, and it was a physical printed letter, even if they were email customers, because what we wanted to do was have something in their hands. And it was like, actually, we told them how much water they use, and we told them how many bathtubs are the equivalent of that. And we know from the Affinity Water bill redesign that was done a few years ago, that has a real big impact. People can sort of go, oh crikey, that's an awful lot. And then we had a launch event, and essentially this letter was an invitation to them to come down, but it explained a bit about water neutrality, because it is hard to explain to customers. And we had so many people come up to us on that first day. We had hundreds of people have attended the launch event. And bear in mind, there's only like 908 homes. And they all came with the letters and went, oh my gosh, look how much I use. And it was so fascinating that even people who actually, from a water industry point of view, we would say are low users, people are using like 100 litres a day. We were like, great. Like, they were like horrified at their use and really wanted to make a difference. And so actually, that was a really insightful piece of work, to just stand and have those conversations with people. And we also did some pond dipping events where there is a body of water, the River Ouzel, within the Bidwell site, and albeit it's not where their water comes from, it is a tributary. So we got people there, mostly families, and we had some experts from the University of Hertfordshire, and they were pond dipping and seeing what wildlife they had. And then we just kind of made the point to them, like, see the water in your taps, it comes from the same environment as these insects and, you know, wildlife here. And if you take too much, they suffer. And it instantly clicked with people. And that was a really, really powerful event. And everybody who came away from that was like, mind blown. I will not waste water again. And I think that was really powerful for us, especially the work we'd done on SOS Save Our Streams was with that insight, but actually really seeing it and standing there and talking to these children in particular, which are teenagers that came to the morning session, and then they came home and went home, came back in the afternoon and said, this is way more interesting than screens. We want to do this. And I was like, that's like the mecca. Wow. But yeah, and then when we had door knockers, again, the face-to-face was really interesting, because as a big water company, you don't get to do that very often. Yeah. And you don't choose to, because it sort of feels like, oh, we can't reach everybody, let's not. And actually, but it was so powerful. 50% of the pledges came from the door knocking activity. It was 8 days, 2 people, and they talked about they knocked on about 895 doors, I think it was, spoke to about 300 people and got 208 pledges out of it. And it was really powerful. Those people saved far more water. They were saving like 52 litres of water a day per household that had that on the doorstep moment. Those people also took Wizzo tablets. I don't know if you've heard of Wizzo tablets. They're tablets that you put in the toilet to save a flush. So instead of flushing, it turns the water kind of blue, it makes it smell nice, and you don't need to flush as often. You can use it 2 or 3 times before you need to flush. So the combination of that in-person conversation, which creates a social contract, because you're kind of like, I've told someone I'm going to do this, as yes. Well I've signed up to do it, and the device of having the Wizzo, they saved more. The average households across everybody who did and didn't save on Bidwell, it was about 22 litres per household per day that was saved. But the people who took Wizzo and had a door knock were 52 litres. It was a really marked difference in the impact that it had on their water savings.
The human body is roughly 60% water. This podcast is 100.
That's really interesting, because you're sort of moving us on to sort of how you measure success, if you like, with these sorts of campaigns. And I just wonder whether, there were more than just the opportunities to say how many people had signed up to make a pledge, but you were also able, I presume, to measure, as you've just been describing, how much water was saved and the potential for that to continue as such.
Yeah, the measurement was really interesting. So we used a combination of different ways to measure it. So we had a control site, so a site that was very similar in makeup of houses and like the size of houses, the stock, the house builders, the geography, so the weather was similar, and we were able to then sort of compare the difference in the two. That site had no comms. The Bidwell West obviously had this entire campaign. We also did a measurement methodology that Affinity Water uses to measure its SOS, Save Our Streams savings, and it also used to create a COVID model to say the impact on water use because of COVID. So it's a really, really complex, incredibly sophisticated piece of AI machine learning that sort of predicts what the usage would have been based on lots of different factors, in particular weather, but lots of factors within the weather. So it could say we would expect on this day this would be the usage in this house, and it does that across the whole site. And then it says what was actually used based on meter readings, and then it can tell you what the difference would be. And in terms of meter readings, we had an interesting debate on this site, because we kind of want smart meter data to be able to say this is what's happening, these people are saving, these people aren't. But we didn't want smart meters to skew the behaviour, because it does. Like, there's just no two ways about it. If you've got a smart meter and you can see the detail, it changes your behaviour. And so we wanted to keep it pure. So actually what we did was an interesting hybrid using a technology called OptoHead. And what it allowed us to do was a technician from IWNL to go up to the meter and download in the same depth, like half an hour reads, data from the AMR meter. And so we had like historical from that moment back for about 18 months for each household, like smart meter level data, but from an AMR meter. And then we did it at the beginning and at the end, and that gave us then all the detail of what happened over the summer. We could take out people who'd moved house, for example, although there's not many of those because it was such a new development. And so we had smart meter level data to analyze, but we didn't have smart meters that would skew the impact. So that was really useful. And then we did also do other sort of measures, like we had focus groups, we surveyed residents. So we asked them the more soft attitudinal stuff. So 96% of people responded said they'd seen it, seen the campaign. 3 out of 4 said it had changed their behaviour, and that was reflected in what we saw in the meter reads. It was useful to be able to say, yeah, from the control site data, and from the water savings data, and from the attitudinal survey, they all marry and tell the same story. But yeah, it made a difference. And what we did see that again was really interesting was 44% of people who hadn't signed up for a pledge, so hadn't taken the digital journey we've been trying to push people on, made savings. And those people made fairly significant savings, 20-ish litres of water a day. So it was really nice to see that even those people who haven't had all those nudge emails, who haven't had the digital experience, still were taking on board the message and still enacting what we were asking of them.
And I think for me as a water company, that's really critical for us. And people have been engaged. You got Tony V on your own podcast, fully engaged in, the whole emphasis. So hi, Tony. But we, as a water company, I've got 1.5 million front doors and I can't knock on them. Yeah. So how do you actually influence customers in a manner which you can't knock on their door and fully engage them? So findings such as this of, well, how did they soak up the information about water consumption? Because it would be great if, the next year we could get 20 litres per house just drop down simply because of soaking up of behaviour from other people that actually are doing something different. So from us, that was a real great finding.
It sounds like, yeah, it is. It's incredibly interesting. It's that, oh, my neighbours are doing it, so I'll get on with it. It almost sounds like you engage with water warriors, for want of a better term, who are really into it, who are going to make that social contract, which sounds exactly like a former diet club I used to go to where I'm accountable. You've got those people who are really into it, making all those savings, but then it's kind of spreading out wider. So even the people who went, oh, I don't really want to talk to you about this, and I'm not going to promise you that I'm going to wash the car with a bucket, at some level have, 20 litres a day is a huge saving.
Yeah, that's a real purpose. Like, I decided to make a change, sort of level of change. Well, interestingly, my background is word of mouth marketing, and when you can get a sort of critical mass of people who do something in an area, actually the behaviour change, what happens is you get social norming, as it's sort of called, where people want to do the same thing as their neighbours, but actually it becomes unfashionable to waste water. So I think we saw a lot of people who'd already taken a pledge earlier in the year, when the two new pledges come out about watering your garden and washing your car. That's really visible. Like most things happen behind closed doors when they're water use. That one's really visible, and that was the sort of thing people are like, I don't want to be seen washing my car with a hose. Like, that's and because of the tight geography, that was really possible. And I think what's really exciting about this blueprint, as opposed to every other water saving initiative that happens that is on a wider scale, there is that proximity, and you can really utilize that peer-to-peer recommendation kind of behavior change style in a way that you just wouldn't on a big scale. It wouldn't be the right mechanism to use. And so I think what we hope we have created, and the proof is in the pudding, and I'll go on to that in a second, but what we hope we have created is something that people can replicate, that they could take all of these, change the word Bidwell to whatever the new site is called, and roll it straight out. Like, all of the assets exist. Anybody who has got a new development that wants to create water neutrality on it, or even just reduce the waters, that this is there for them. And we're actually currently rolling this out in a version of this in Cambridge with Cambridge Water. So we're taking everything we learned from this and trying to put it into a slightly bigger geography and seeing the impact of that and how it works. We're only 8 weeks in, signs are good, but we've been able to use multimedia in a way that you wasn't really media options when you're talking to 1,000 houses. There are, you can actually buy TV advertising and radio advertising against 908 homes. It's kind of scary. We used a lot of social media, and we used a lot of local social media groups and things like that. But it's a different shape of campaigns. It'll be really interesting to see whether or not it works on a scale, or whether or not it's something that works when it's in the small sort of smaller geography. Cambridge is still fairly small by water industry standards, but yeah, it's very interesting to see it being rolled out in a different way.
And I think areas like Cambridge, why it's really important, I talked earlier about foresight, and Cambridge is one of our foresight areas. So we had the government plan to increase growth and more housing in Cambridge. It's one of the most expensive places in the UK to live. Houses are really expensive compared to the number of people want to live there and the supply. So when Michael Gove at the time announced, I'm going to do all these houses, the first response was, that's great, but there's no water. And unless we do things like this, then the water industry potentially could block growth and block the opportunities for things such as more houses, cheaper houses, more sustainable houses itself. So being able to take something like Bidwell's and then apply to another water company area and another city where we know there's problems, it's everything what the Breakthrough Challenge should be funding.
Yeah, and I think actually it's really lovely to hear about something, Affinity Water have done this with Weir, but the fact that it is going to spread out wider than that you're not, what's the social media, ring fencing it? Gatekeeping. That's
it happens so often where it's like, we did this brilliant work, and then here it is in a folder, and it lives in somebody's drawer or in a virtual file, and has never seen the light of day again. I think is really nice to see this being rolled out again. And of course, what Gareth was talking about at the beginning in terms of doing the third site, where we use technology and behaviour change and offsetting together. We're going to be rolling this out again within the within the blueprint materials. So it would be interesting to see how the two sites compare, how if you introduce technology as well, and also you can get people at the beginning of the process.
Yeah.
We purposely made this on a site that had already existed. It had started 2 years ago. Now, some people were still moving in during the process, but it was an established site. We're talking about on site 3, talking to people before, even house builders, before they build the houses, about building this technology into it and buying into the idea of being water neutral, and in the sales process buying into a water neutral housing development, and then when they move in, and so you're priming them all the way along. And I'm really excited to see, when you get someone who's bought in at such an important level, the difference it will make to them.
Absolutely. I think we've talked in our research about moments of change being the real opportunity. So before somebody's had time to build a habit, making them think so that the habit they build is actually a positive one.
Yeah, there's some really interesting research. The Behavioural Insights team, BIT, they did some research around getting people to cycle to work, and they found that you're 13% more likely to do to change your behaviour into that if you've just moved house. And therefore, I think it must have been for someone like TfL, and that was what they decided to do, is sort of take that moment of change and try and change it, and tackle people who are moving house. It's definitely a really, really great point in time to get people, especially because nothing else, when you're tackling people to change their behaviour, if you're working for a brand, for example, there is brand values that are attached to that, the reason why somebody likes your brand and what may like your brand and feel an affinity to it. With a water company, is purely geography. That is the reason they're your customer. And so you have to find a commonality. And yes, all these people have chosen to live in one housing development and a type of house. So there are some, similarities, but actually there isn't necessarily anything beyond that like intrinsically links them. So I think it is trying to sort of tackle some of those things. But if you can get that moment in time, that's the thing that links them, and that's really important.
Well, I'm hoping you're going to impress us when I ask the final question, which is basically whether you can share with us what your own personal water use is. And we normally do this as litres per person per day. Jane, I don't know if you want to go first, because it sounds like Gareth is raring to go.
Gareth and I had a chat about this yesterday. Mine is 57 litres per person per day.
That's brilliant.
I think it probably helps that there's 5 of us. I've got 3 quite small kids, so I suspect Gareth has got a teenage boy, and I think that makes a difference, or nearly teenage. That makes a difference. But yeah, I think it probably helps with that. But I've even caught my very small children going to each other, "You have to turn the tap off, Mum will kill you."
That's the way to do it.
Myself, I'm really disappointed that Jane beat me. So I was at one point thinking about refusing to answer the question, but I've got the advantage. I've got a smart meter in my house, so I'm in a region where smart meters have been rolled out. So I actually know my consumption down to the 0.23. So I've got 59.23 litres per person per day. So I'm 2 litres behind Jane, but I am calling foul on the fact she's got 3 children and I've only got 1. But
that's really good, because when you when you think that the average at the moment is around 146.
Yeah.
It just shows you that it's possible without making a huge amount of effort. Well, thanks both. It's been fascinating hearing about the project.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This podcast is brought to you by CCW, the voice for water consumers.
So there we were. That was Gareth and Jane talking about the Bidwell water savers. I thought it was really interesting. How about you, Karen?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think it just proves that we've got to use a combination of practical help and advice, but a lot of behavioural science as well, because if we are going to achieve the savings that everybody is planning to achieve, we really need to turn the dial on water saving, and that's probably something that this project can give a bit of a steer on.
Absolutely. And I think for me what was fascinating is that when they knocked on doors and spoke directly to people, that's when people signed up to the pledges. But that actually the people who didn't sign up to the pledges, just from watching their neighbours' behaviours, also made water savings. And I think, for all Waterfall listeners there, it just emphasises the fact that you can make changes and that actually will influence other people's behaviour. So we all collectively are responsible for sharing the message, the good habits, and encouraging everyone to use water wisely. Great stuff. So I hope everybody enjoyed that. Certainly I did. So, Producer Tom, I have to tell our listeners that you can email us at podcast@ccwater.org.uk, and you can look for us on social media by searching at CCW Voice. So, that just leaves me to say thank you, Karen and Tom.
And thank you, Cath.
Thank you so much, Cath, as always. This has been great.
Bye, everyone.